So now we're going to talk about several models of above average returns and look at that in a couple of different ways. So first of all, the IO, Industrial Organizational Model of Above Average Returns, refers to the idea that external environment's dominant influence is really relative on the choice of our strategy and the actions we associate with it. So this model suggests that returns are influenced more so by the characteristics of what's going on in the industry and outside our organization than our own internal resources and capabilities. So a firm is able to increase its performance only when it competes in that industry with the highest profit potential, and it learns how to use its resources and implement the strategy required by the industry structural characteristics. So we're talking about the idea that this reality of an organization using this model has to excel profitably in the marketplace because we're primarily focused on the external industry and our competitors. That those competitive realities associated with this IO model find firms imitating each other's strategy and actions, taking to implement them. So we see a lot of copycat competitors in this scenario. Firms use the 5 forces model, which you will talk about in a future chapter around competitiveness, and measure that by its profitability. So as well as we must have the most advantageous position for the firm to take in that industry, given the industry's characteristics and that external environment and the firm's resources, our capabilities, our core competencies, and our competitive advantage influence the company's ability to achieve strategic competitiveness. So it's really how we look at the environment and what we do with that in order to develop our own strategy. And this is a model. This is the model that says we start with the external environment, and then we look at an attractive part of that environment in the industry where we want to compete. And then we formulate our strategy, and then we look at our assets, our skills, our resources, and then we use our core competencies to implement it. And when we do that, it assumes the firm's strategy is a set of these commitments and actions that flow from the industry knowledge to the firm we choose to compete most closely against. So next, we're going to talk about the resource-based model of above average returns. And in this model, we are looking mostly at our unique resources, our capabilities, the uniqueness within our doors or walls within our organization. And so resources are inputs in a firm's production process. Our employees, our capital equipment, our intellectual information, and what we have, all those resources is where we start. And so our core competencies are most visible in those internal resources, and that drives us to create a strategy from those core competencies and looking at what our capabilities are. And so through continual review of that, as we look at those capabilities as competitive advantage, and we hold on to those tight and make sure we're not outsourcing them, as an example. So when we use this model, it suggests that the strategy allows for competitive advantage when we first recognize who we are and what our resources are. And then we look at our capabilities, and then we look at our competitors and look at how we compete against them. And then we look at the industry and create a strategy that fits that. And then we look for above average returns in that way. And so firms integrate those individual resources to develop these kind of configurations of resources and our potential to build more capabilities, to build on what we have, to create core competencies, or to create new and more capabilities, so that they're developed with a stronger likelihood of being a core competence and creating competitive advantage. So the third model is a stakeholder model of above average returns. And in this case, we're focused on who are our stakeholders. Stakeholders are anyone that that have an invested interest in our organization or the products and services we sell. So stakeholders could be lawmakers, regulators, special interest groups, non-governmental organizations. It could be our board, it could be our employees, and it could be so internal and external stakeholders that play a role in pricing and policing what we do, and we have to meet their needs. So many successful organizations have learned that taking really good care of those primary stakeholders leads to competitive advantage and higher performance. So we can take suppliers as an example as a primary stakeholder. If I have a really crummy relationship with a supplier and they're going to be out, they're not consistent, they don't provide me what I need when I need it, that is going to cost me money and time. If you've been in my, or you're in my operations production class, we do a simulation in that class where you are the operations manager of a textile company and you make product. At one point in the game, in the simulation, you choose your suppliers. When it starts, they force you to choose suppliers through the tutorial. And in that process, you realize somebody is shorting you a lot. So you have a real life example in that simulation of how important those suppliers are. So that's just an example of how your stakeholders can dramatically impact your returns. And so when we look at strategic planning from this model, we start with our relationships with those external stakeholders, and then we move to our relationships with them, reciprocity. We want to provide value to them, and they provide value to us, and we have this loyal relationship. And we get information from them, and we know what they need, and we know what we need, and that whole supply chain, as an example, in this case, builds in order to create higher value. And as they create that value, then we have a stronger foothold in the industry, for example. So we create a strategy based on that model, and then we implement it and look for returns in that way. So managing those stakeholders can be really economically feasible because it leads to behaviors that connect what we need and what they need, and providing value to each other. So well-treated stakeholders reciprocate, and they treat us well, we treat them well, and that reciprocity creates a higher value and a more fair and sustainable relationship. And then there's a couple of terms in the book. Distributional justice is when stakeholders feel as they receive value, and what they contribute is kind of equal, fair, I would say. Procedural justice means that we listen to our stakeholders and we consider their position. And interactional justice is when we treat them with honesty, respect. So those are just three different ways you can think about the importance of stakeholder relationships. And it doesn't mean that the firm should treat stakeholders poorly. In fact, poor treatment is likely to lead to competitive problems over time as they choose not to work with us. And those unequal dependencies mean that those stakeholders can possess different degrees of ability to influence us, to harm us, or to help us. And the more critical and valued a stakeholder's participation with us is, the greater our dependency on that stakeholder. And the greater the dependency gives them more influence over us. So we really have to find a way how to keep those critical resources fair and treated well, but not giving away our power either. So those are three models for looking at how we create strategy in an organization. So next, we're going to talk about vision, mission, and values in the next recording. Thanks.